I never imagined that the day my husband promised me a honeymoon would end with me standing alone at the airport, clutching a suitcase full of broken dreams. It was supposed to be perfect, the kind of honeymoon everyone dreams of, the sandy beaches, the romantic dinners, the quiet moments where you feel like you're the only two people in the world. But that morning, everything changed. We were at the airport, the excitement bubbling inside me. My heart was racing, my mind busy with thoughts of how the next 2 weeks would unfold. The departure gate was crowded with families, couples, and solo travelers, but I only had eyes for him. My husband, the man who promised me the world, who promised this honeymoon, who made me feel like I was the luckiest woman alive. I remember the way he looked at me that morning, his eyes soft, a grin playing at the corners of his lips. It was like he was finally going to give me the one thing I'd been begging for, a break from the mundane, a chance to escape into paradise. "Are you excited?" he asked, the glint of mischief in his eyes as he nudged my shoulder. I laughed, barely able to contain my joy. "You have no idea," I replied, squeezing his hand tighter. The flight was a dream, smooth, relaxing, and filled with anticipation. I couldn't stop picturing the beach, the crystal-clear water, the sun warming my skin. We'd talked about this moment for months, and now it was finally here. I couldn't help but imagine the way we would explore the streets of an exotic city, enjoying every single second of our time together. When we landed, we made our way to the baggage claim, excitedly discussing what we would do first. But then, just as the baggage carousel began to move, his words came out of nowhere, and the world I had built for myself in my mind came crashing down. "You're flying alone," he said, his voice cold, almost flat. At first I thought I had misheard him. The noise of the airport, the jet lag, the excitement, it all blurred for a second. But then I saw his face, and I knew this wasn't some misunderstanding. He wasn't smiling. There was no warmth in his eyes. I stood frozen, unable to process what he was saying. "What do you mean I'm flying alone?" I stammered, panic creeping up my throat. "I'm not coming with you," he replied, turning his eyes away from mine. "I'm not going on the honeymoon." The words hit me like a slap to the face. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. I had to be dreaming. This couldn't be happening. But it was. I tried to force the words out, to ask him what was going on, why he was doing this to me. But my throat tightened. My mind raced, trying to grasp the meaning of his words. The tears started to build up in my eyes, but I wouldn't let them fall. "Not yet. Not here." "What's going on?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I can't explain it," he said, his eyes avoiding mine, his tone flat. "You'll be fine. You deserve to have this trip. Just go. Enjoy yourself." I stood there, staring at him, not knowing what to do. He turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the airport, the sound of the baggage carousel spinning in the background. I felt as if the floor had been ripped out from under me. The one person I trusted, the one person I thought I could count on, had just shattered everything. But why? What happened? What had changed between us? I grabbed my suitcase, my body numb, my heart racing with a cocktail of anger, confusion, and disbelief. I tried to make sense of what he'd said, but it felt like a bad dream. My mind couldn't connect the dots. I was still standing there, staring at the spot where he'd disappeared, when a voice behind me snapped me out of my daze. "Excuse me, ma'am. Are you okay?" I turned to face a stranger, a man in a suit, holding a clipboard. He was probably someone who worked for the airline, checking on the passengers, making sure everyone was where they were supposed to be. I don't know," I said, my voice shaky. "I think my husband just left me here." The man's face softened. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Do you need help? We can get you to a hotel if you need a place to stay." I shook my head, my chest tightening with anxiety. I couldn't think. I didn't want his pity. I didn't need some stranger's sympathy. I wanted answers. I needed to understand what had happened and why he'd done this to me. But the more I tried to understand, the less I knew. All I could think about was how everything had changed in an instant. how my honeymoon, my dream, was now a nightmare. And as I made my way to the hotel, tears started to fall, not just for what he'd done, but for the unknown that lay ahead. What had happened to our relationship? Was this the end of us? Or was there something more to this story that I wasn't seeing? One thing was clear. This was only the beginning. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal as I checked into the hotel alone. Every step I took felt heavier than the last, the weight of the suitcase in my hand almost symbolic of the crushing reality that was beginning to settle in. I could still see his face in my mind, his words echoing like a constant, bitter reminder that everything I thought I knew had been a lie. I tried to distract myself by focusing on the details around me: the hotel's grand lobby, the soft hum of the elevator, the distant chatter of other guests, but none of it helped. My heart felt hollow, my mind racing with thoughts I didn't want to face. What was going through his head? What happened between us? I kept asking myself these questions, but every time I tried to answer, the truth became more elusive. It was as if everything I had believed in, every promise he made, had evaporated into thin air. The hotel room was spacious and luxurious, a far cry from the cheap motels I had expected to stay in. It looked like something out of a postcard, with its stunning views of the city skyline and the soft glow of the lamps casting shadows on the plush furniture. But the luxury felt cold, empty without him beside me, without the warmth of his touch. I collapsed onto the bed, the soft sheets feeling foreign against my skin. My mind kept replaying the moment at the airport, his voice ringing in my ears. "You're flying alone." It was a statement that had shattered me in ways I hadn't expected. The more I thought about it, the more questions piled up, each one more urgent than the last. What had happened in the days leading up to this trip? Why had he done this? Was it something I had done? Something I hadn't noticed? My mind spiraled, unable to stop the thoughts from running wild. I reached for my phone, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he would have sent a message, some sort of explanation. But there was nothing, no text, no missed call, just a sea of unanswered questions. I stared at the blank screen for a moment, willing my mind to stop racing. But it wouldn't. In desperation, I decided to call him. I didn't know why. I knew I was only setting myself up for more heartache. But I had to know. I needed to hear his voice, even if it meant getting nothing but more pain in return. The phone rang several times before he finally picked up. I could hear the faint sound of static on the line before his voice came through, distant and cold. "Hello?" I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. "Where are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. I'm already back," he replied, his tone flat, almost distant. "I had to handle some things. You should enjoy the trip. You're in good hands." "Good hands?" My heart clenched. "You just left me, alone, at the airport. You promised me this honeymoon. What's going on?" There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear him breathing, but he didn't respond. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until I couldn't take it anymore. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I don't want to talk about it right now," he said, his voice now tinged with frustration. "Just go on the trip. It's over." The finality in his words hit me like a ton of bricks. "It's over?" I repeated, my voice a mere whisper. "I can't do this anymore. I need space," he said, his tone devoid of emotion. "I'm sorry, but I think it's better this way." And then, just like that, he hung up. No apology, no explanation, just a cold, heartless end to everything I had believed in. I stared at the phone in my hand, my fingers trembling as I tried to process what had just happened. The honeymoon I had dreamed of for so long had turned into my worst nightmare. And the man I thought I knew had vanished before my eyes, replaced by a stranger who had no interest in explaining himself. I threw the phone down on the bed, tears finally streaming down my face. I was alone, completely and utterly alone, in a foreign city, with no one to turn to and no one to help me make sense of this nightmare. The minutes ticked by slowly as I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, my mind a whirlpool of emotions. I couldn't shake the feeling of abandonment that clung to me, suffocating me from the inside out. How could he do this to me? How could he leave me stranded in a place I didn't know, with no warning, no explanation? Was this truly the end? Or was this some kind of twisted test? Some sick joke that I just couldn't understand? I didn't know, and that terrified me. Hours passed before I finally mustered the strength to leave the hotel room. The world outside felt like a different universe, completely disconnected from the chaos of my heart. I found myself walking aimlessly through the city streets, not sure where I was going, but needing to escape the suffocating emptiness that had taken hold of me. I passed cafes, restaurants, and shops, but everything felt out of reach. I was surrounded by people, yet I was more isolated than I'd ever been. And then, as I wandered through the city, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from him. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. I need to go." That was it. No more explanations. No more apologies. Just a simple, heartless text message. And with that, I realized something I hadn't wanted to face. The honeymoon wasn't just a trip. It was the beginning of the end. The man I thought I knew had never really existed. And what we had, what I had believed in, was nothing more than an illusion. I stopped in my tracks, the weight of it all crashing down on me. The honeymoon was over. And so was the life I thought I had with him. The days that followed were a blur, fragments of reality that didn't quite add up, like pieces of a shattered mirror that refused to fit back together. I spent the first night in the hotel, but it wasn't restful. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. The face of the man I thought I knew, haunting me with his coldness, his betrayal. I didn't know how to move forward. The city around me seemed so full of life, yet I felt like a ghost, walking among the crowds, disconnected from everything. I was a tourist in a foreign place, but it wasn't just the geography that felt foreign. It was the person I had become, the woman who had been left alone without warning, without explanation. I tried to distract myself by exploring the city, but nothing felt right. I wandered through the streets aimlessly, stopping in cafes and restaurants, trying to put on a brave face, but it was all a lie. Each new place only reminded me of how alone I was. I couldn't bring myself to enjoy the trip, not without him by my side. But as the days went on, something strange began to happen. The anger and hurt that had consumed me started to shift. There was a gnawing feeling in my chest, a sense of confusion that I couldn't shake. Why had he left me like that? Why hadn't he told me the truth? I was desperate for answers. On the third day of my solo honeymoon, I received another message from him. My heart skipped a beat when I saw his name on the screen, but as I opened the message, it was more of the same, more excuses, more distance. I've made a decision. I need to focus on myself for now. I hope you understand. That was it. No apology, no explanation, just more of the same cold indifference. I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity, my fingers trembling as I read it over and over again. Something about his words didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the way he seemed so calm, so detached, as if leaving me alone in a foreign country was nothing more than a minor inconvenience to him. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know the truth that he refused to give me, the truth that had been buried beneath layers of lies and silence. I decided to call his best friend, Mark. He was the only person who had ever seemed to know anything about what was really going on in my husband's life. I didn't know if he would have the answers I was looking for, but I had to try. When he answered, I could hear the hesitation in his voice. "Hey, what's up?" "Mark, I need to know what happened," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. "I need to understand why he left me at the airport, why he's doing this to me, why he won't even talk to me. There was a long pause on the other end, and I could hear him sigh. I don't know everything, but I think you deserve to know the truth. I felt a chill run down my spine. What truth? Look, I don't want to get into too much detail, but there's someone else, Mark said, his voice low. I don't know how long it's been going on, but he's been seeing someone behind your back. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't breathe. I thought I had misheard him. What do you mean? What are you talking about? He's been hiding it from you, Mark continued, his voice soft. I don't know if he was planning to tell you or not, but I guess he couldn't keep it in anymore. Who? I whispered, barely able to speak. Who is it? There was another long pause. I could hear Mark shifting on the other end, as if trying to decide whether or not to say more. I don't know her name, but she's someone from work. He's been spending a lot of time with her. I'm sorry. I didn't want you to find out like this. I felt the world spin around me. I was numb, unable to process the words. Why didn't he tell me? Why didn't he just leave me? Why do it like this? I don't know. I really don't. But he's been shutting everyone out lately. I think he's afraid of facing what he's done, Mark said, his voice filled with regret. Look, I'm sorry. I didn't want to be the one to tell you, but I felt like you had a right to know. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of the chaos in my head. The man I had trusted, the man I thought I was building a life with, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I felt my chest tighten, my heart shattering all over again. He's been seeing someone else, I repeated, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. And he left me. Just like that. Yeah. I'm sorry. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling. I couldn't think. I couldn't process. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, but one thing was clear. Everything I had known about my marriage, everything I had trusted, had been a lie. The honeymoon I had dreamed of was nothing more than a cruel joke, a symbol of everything I had lost. I stared out the window of my hotel room, my mind spiraling. The city lights below twinkled like stars, but they felt so far away, unreachable. I had to face the truth now. My husband wasn't the man I thought he was. He wasn't the man I had fallen in love with. And the worst part? He hadn't even given me the decency of telling me the truth to my face. He had left me to figure it out on my own. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I wiped them away, refusing to let them fall. I had been betrayed. I had been abandoned. But I wasn't going to let this destroy me. I would leave this city. I would leave this marriage behind. And I would rebuild my life, no matter how painful it was. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something new. The next few days were a blur of empty hotel rooms, cold meals, and endless contemplation. I spent my time wandering the city, trying to outrun the emotions that threatened to consume me. I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to be in this foreign city, forced to confront a reality I wasn't ready to face. But every step I took, every corner I turned, the weight of the truth pressed harder against my chest. I had been betrayed. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted, had been hiding something so dark, so devastating, and I had never seen it coming. I had been living in a dream, one that had shattered the moment Mark's words had sunk in. He's been seeing someone else. I replayed those words over and over, like a haunting refrain. Who was she? How long had it been going on? Did he love her? Was she the reason he left me so easily? I had spent so many years building my life around him, convinced that we were a team, that we could overcome anything. But now? Now I felt like a fool, standing alone in a city I didn't belong in, trying to piece together the broken shards of a relationship I thought was unbreakable. The worst part was that I couldn't get any answers. Not from him. Not from anyone else. He had closed himself off entirely, refusing to speak to me. And his silence only made the pain more unbearable. On the 5th day, I received another message from him. I had been expecting it. Another cold, impersonal message, another attempt to distance himself from me without facing the consequences of his actions. But this time, it was different. The message was short, but it hit me like a wave. I've made my decision. It's over. I'm staying here with her. I need to move on. The finality in his words was like a slap across my face. It wasn't just the fact that he had left me for another woman. It was the way he had abandoned me without even the slightest attempt to make amends. He had made his decision, and now I was nothing more than a casualty in the wake of his choices. I stared at the screen, my heart heavy with disbelief. How could he do this? How could he walk away without any remorse, without even an apology? The truth was clear now, painfully clear. This wasn't just a momentary lapse or a mistake. This wasn't something I could forgive. He had made a conscious choice to leave me, to choose someone else, and that was something I couldn't overlook. But as much as the anger and hurt coursed through my veins, there was something else, something I hadn't expected to feel, a strange sense of relief. Relief that the facade had finally fallen. Relief that I didn't have to live in the shadow of his lies anymore. It wasn't a clean, easy relief, but it was there. I knew now that I had been living in a world of illusions, believing in something that had never been true. I took a deep breath, letting the realization wash over me. It was over, and even though it hurt more than anything I had ever experienced, I was free. Free from the lies, free from the uncertainty, free from the person I had thought he was. That evening I went for a walk along the waterfront, the cool breeze brushing against my skin, trying to clear my mind. I stopped by a bench overlooking the water, taking in the quiet, the stillness of the moment. The city lights sparkled in the distance, and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore brought a sense of calm to my frayed nerves. As I sat there, I realized something. As much as I had been hurt, as much as I had been abandoned, I still had the power to move forward. I still had the ability to rebuild, to find my own happiness, even if it meant doing it without him. It wasn't going to be easy. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done being a victim in my own life. I was done being trapped in a relationship that no longer served me. I was done allowing someone else's decisions to dictate my happiness. I stood up from the bench and looked out over the water one last time. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light across the horizon. It was beautiful, peaceful, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't going to let him define me. I wasn't going to let this betrayal break me. I had a life to live, a future to create, and no one was going to take that away from me. As I walked back to my hotel room, my phone buzzed again. Another message from him, another attempt to break me. But this time, I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I had let go of the past. Now, it was time to move on, time to start anew. The days after the message were the hardest, but they also marked the beginning of something unexpected. It was as if the universe had decided that the painful chapter of my life was closing, and a new one was waiting to be written. I didn't know how long it would take or what the future would hold, but I did know one thing. I wasn't going to stay trapped in this misery forever. I would heal. I spent the next week in the city, still unsure of what to do next, but there was a spark of resolve inside me that I couldn't ignore. I had been broken, yes, but I had also been given a gift, even if I didn't see it that way at first. The gift of independence. The gift of learning to stand on my own, without depending on anyone else's approval, without relying on anyone to make me feel whole. I took long walks, visited museums, and explored parts of the city I had never even thought about before. It was like I was seeing the world through new eyes, eyes that were no longer clouded by the pain of betrayal. I was learning how to enjoy the moment again, how to breathe without feeling suffocated. But it wasn't just the city that was helping me heal, it was me. Each day, I felt a little stronger. I started to pick up the pieces of myself that had been scattered and forgotten, buried beneath layers of sadness and confusion. I began writing again. I hadn't written in months, not since before the honeymoon, and it felt cathartic to put pen to paper. I wrote about everything, the heartbreak, the loneliness, the anger, but also about the small victories. The times I smiled again, the moments I found myself laughing, the times I remembered who I was before him. It was a slow process, but it was progress. One afternoon I sat by the water, my notebook in my lap, and I felt it, an overwhelming sense of clarity. The weight of everything that had happened over the past week was still there, heavy in my chest, but it didn't consume me the way it had at the start. I realized something important. I didn't need closure from him. I didn't need him to explain himself or beg for forgiveness. He had already made his choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. The decision was simple. I was going to walk away from him, from everything that had kept me tethered to a life I didn't want anymore. And I was going to do it on my own terms. I spent the next few days packing my things, making arrangements to return home. But before I left, I did something that felt both empowering and symbolic. I called him. The phone rang twice before he picked up, his voice as detached as ever. "Hello, I'm coming home," I said, my voice steady. "I'm done. I don't need you to explain anything. I don't need any more lies. I'm taking back control of my life. I'm moving on." There was a long silence on the other end, and I almost expected him to try to apologize or explain himself again. But he didn't. He didn't say a word. "Goodbye," I added, and before he could respond, I hung up the phone. I didn't need his closure. I didn't need his excuses. I had everything I needed within myself. The next day I boarded a flight back home. The weight on my chest wasn't gone completely, but it was lighter. Each mile that passed brought me closer to the woman I had once been. Strong, independent, capable of making her own decisions without anyone's approval. And when I finally returned to my apartment, it didn't feel like defeat. It didn't feel like the end of something. It felt like a new beginning. The apartment that had once been filled with shared dreams and promises of a future now stood as a reminder of how far I had come. The place was still the same, but I was different. I started making changes, small ones at first. I threw away the things that reminded me of him, his old shirts, the gifts he had given me, even the mementos from our honeymoon that we had never taken. It felt freeing to let go of the physical reminders, to create space for something new. I redecorated my apartment, filling it with things that represented who I was becoming, bright, optimistic, full of possibilities. I signed up for a yoga class, something I had always wanted to try but never had the time for. I reconnected with friends I had lost touch with while I was so consumed by him. I even started a blog, sharing my story with others who had gone through similar experiences. Writing about my journey gave me strength, and hearing from people who had been where I was gave me comfort. I realized that, in a strange way, this heartbreak had opened up a world of possibilities for me. I could be anything I wanted to be. I could create a life that was entirely mine without anyone to hold me back. And that thought? That thought was more exhilarating than I could have imagined. But there was still a part of me that wondered about him. What was he doing now? How was he handling the aftermath of his decisions? But I refused to let those thoughts consume me. I had spent enough time wondering about his life and his choices. It was time to focus on my own. And one day, as I sat at a cafe with a cup of coffee in my hand, watching people pass by, I realized something profound. The woman I had become, the woman who had fought through the pain, who had rebuilt her life from the ashes, was stronger, more powerful, and more capable than the woman I had been before. I was no longer defined by his absence, by his betrayal. I was defined by my own resilience, by my ability to stand tall despite the storm, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled. A few months had passed since I left the city, since I boarded that plane home with nothing but my resolve and a new sense of clarity. The woman who had arrived back in her apartment, broken and vulnerable, was long gone. In her place stood someone who had learned to live for herself, someone who had taken the pieces of her shattered heart and rebuilt them into something unbreakable. At first, I didn't think I was ready for the future. I was scared, unsure of how to proceed. But then I remembered something important. I had already survived the worst. I had already faced the hardest moment of my life, the moment when I realized that the person I had loved most had betrayed me. That moment had broken me, yes, but it had also given me something I hadn't realized I was missing: strength. Strength that I could use to create the life I had always wanted. And so, I started taking more chances. I started saying yes to things I would have shied away from before. I started traveling again, visiting places I had always dreamed of going. I spent weekends in art galleries, afternoons at local bookstores, and evenings at rooftop cafes with friends who made me laugh and reminded me of what it was like to feel alive. But the most important change came when I finally acknowledged what had been missing from my life all along. Myself. I had spent so many years trying to make someone else happy, trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine, trying to be the woman my husband wanted me to be. And in doing so, I had lost sight of who I truly was, the woman who was creative, passionate, and capable of so much more than I had given myself credit for. It was time to put that woman first. It was time to build a life that was solely mine, one that no one could take away from me. One afternoon, while I was working on a new project, a blog series I had started to share my experiences and help others who had been through similar heartbreak, I received an email that took me by surprise. It was from a publishing house asking if I would consider writing a memoir about my journey. They had been following my blog and were moved by my story, and they wanted to help me turn it into something bigger. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just a few months ago, I couldn't even imagine a future for myself. Now, I had the chance to share my story with the world, to help others heal and find strength in their own struggles. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel proud. Proud of how far I had come, proud of the work I had done, proud of the woman I had become. The process of writing the memoir was cathartic. It forced me to revisit the painful moments, the raw emotions, and the broken pieces of my past. But it also allowed me to see the transformation that had occurred. Every word I wrote was a testament to my growth, my resilience, and my determination to never be defined by someone else's actions. Through the writing process, I realized that I had become my own hero. I had faced the darkest chapter of my life and emerged stronger than I could have ever imagined. And now, I was ready to take on whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that I could overcome anything. But it wasn't just about writing anymore. I had built a life for myself, one that was full of possibilities. I started taking on new challenges, ones that I never thought I'd have the courage to pursue. I enrolled in a photography class, something I had always been passionate about but had never found the time for. I started volunteering at a local women's shelter, helping others who were going through similar struggles. And then, one day, as I sat at a coffee shop with my memoir draft open on my laptop, I received a call from an old friend. It was Sarah, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. She was the kind of person who always knew how to make me laugh, the kind of friend who was always there when I needed a distraction from the chaos of life. "Hey, I know it's been a while, but I was wondering if you'd like to join me for a weekend getaway next month," she said. "Just you, me, and a cabin in the mountains. What do you think?" The invitation was unexpected, but it felt like the perfect way to celebrate how far I had come. I hadn't realized how much I had missed the carefree side of myself, the part of me that loved to laugh and enjoy life without the weight of the past on my shoulders. "I'd love to," I said, smiling to myself. "Let's do it." The weekend away was everything I needed and more. It was a chance to reconnect with myself, to remember what it felt like to be free, to be happy without the burden of heartache weighing me down. I found myself laughing harder than I had in months, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't think about him. Not about his betrayal, not about the heartbreak. I was simply living in the moment, enjoying the life I had built for myself. When I returned home, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known before. I had faced my worst fears, come out the other side stronger, and embraced a future that was full of possibilities. The woman I had once been, the one who was afraid of being alone, who relied on someone else for her happiness, was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who had learned to love herself and who wasn't afraid to take risks and pursue her dreams. And as I looked out my apartment window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and orange, I knew that I was finally free. Free to live the life I had always wanted. Free to love myself without needing anyone else's validation. The future was mine to shape. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where it would take me. As the months rolled by, I settled into my new life. The changes I had made weren't just external. They were deep, rooted in the core of who I was. The woman who had once been afraid of being alone, of facing the world without someone by her side, was now the woman who reveled in her own company. I had learned to thrive in solitude, to find peace in the quiet moments, and to embrace the idea that I didn't need anyone else to complete me. I had built a life that was rich with experiences, filled with self-discovery and growth. I surrounded myself with people who lifted me up, who encouraged me to chase my dreams. I focused on the things that brought me joy: photography, writing, traveling. I started volunteering at a local shelter, helping women who were in similar situations to what I had gone through. It was my way of giving back, of showing others that healing was possible, that they too could rebuild their lives after the darkest of times. And then, one day, as I sat at my desk, finalizing the last chapter of my memoir, I received a call from an unexpected source. It was him. The phone rang, and for a moment, I hesitated. I hadn't heard from him in months, and part of me didn't even want to pick up. But I had come a long way, and I had nothing to fear anymore. So, I answered. "Hello?" My voice was steady, calm, nothing like it had been the day I had been left at the airport, standing alone and broken. "Hey!" "It's me," he said, his voice hesitant, unsure. I didn't say anything right away. The silence stretched between us, and I could hear the sound of his breathing, but no words came. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I don't expect it," he continued, his voice tinged with regret. I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. I've been a mess, and I was selfish. I left you without explanation, and I've spent every day regretting it." His words were exactly what I had wanted to hear months ago, but now they didn't hold the same weight. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need him to feel guilty for what he had done. What mattered was how far I had come, how much stronger I had become since that day. "I appreciate you saying that," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But I've moved on. I've healed. And I've built a life that I'm proud of. I don't need you to fix anything. I'm not the person I was when you left me. And that's a good thing." There was another pause on the line, but this time I didn't feel the need to fill it. I had made my peace with everything that had happened. His apology, while appreciated, no longer held the power to undo the pain. I had already forgiven myself, and that was what mattered. "I just wanted to let you know that I've thought a lot about what happened," he said quietly. "I've seen the damage I caused, and I understand why you had to walk away. I don't expect us to ever be the same, but I hope you're okay." "I'm more than okay," I replied, a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "I'm stronger than I've ever been, and I have a life now that's filled with hope and possibility. I've learned that I don't need anyone else to make me whole. I've learned how to be enough for myself." We spoke for a few more minutes, but it was clear that we were both different people now. He had apologized, and I had forgiven, not for him, but for me. I didn't need closure from him anymore. I had already closed that chapter on my own terms. When I hung up, I felt a sense of finality. A weight lifted from my chest. The past had been painful, but it had shaped me into the woman I was today. Strong, independent, and unafraid to stand up for herself. I no longer felt the need to carry the baggage of that failed relationship with me. I was ready to move forward, unburdened by the ghosts of my past. That evening, as I sat on my balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I reflected on everything I had been through. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the loneliness, it had all led me to this moment. It had led me to this woman I had become. And I was proud of her. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace with myself. I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. I wasn't defined by the people who had hurt me. I was defined by my own strength, by my ability to rise above the ashes and create a life that was entirely mine. I smiled to myself, watching the sky turn from golden to purple. The future was bright, and I was excited for what it held. There were still so many adventures to be had, so many new beginnings waiting just around the corner. And this time, I was ready to face them on my own. Because now I knew something important. I was enough. And I always had been.